Okay, I'm on the other end of the data deluge. So many people who are here are creating it and sending it out there into the air for us and over the internet, and I'm trying to figure out what to do with some of those data. Okay, so I'm interested in how 3D visualization of natural phenomena, okay, not charts and graphs and maps necessarily, across different spatial and temporal scales can help scientists get better insights, develop new hypotheses, and then also explain their work not only to other scientists, but to a wide audience, okay? And so I do this work at the Evergreen State College, which is a small liberal arts college in Washington State, interdisciplinary institution, and I have many science collaborators from other institutions. And my work is funded by the National Science Foundation. Okay, so this is what I'm going to talk about. Essentially, I'm going to talk about the way in which this work has evolved as we move into what some people have called the petabyte age, okay? But we're also moving into another age, which is the age of climate change, okay? And so ecology is changing as we move into that age. Okay, so I began my work with ecologists when I returned to Evergreen after my PhD dissertation and found that we didn't have a lot of supercomputers on campus. This is a small 4,000 student campus, and but we did have a lot of ecologists, and I began working with them. Then from databases, which of course if you're a database researcher, you really like data a lot. But how are you going to get people to use databases? Well, we found visualization is a really good way to get them to use the databases. And from visualizing just the forest canopy, we've moved out into environmental science. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing and where I think some of the research challenges are. Okay. All right, so this all started because essentially, for me, because as someone who used to work in industry and saw what database technology had done for the airlines, the banking industry, Wall Street, of course, maybe we wish they hadn't done what they did for Wall Street. But essentially, the big problem for ecologists back in the early 90s was the problem of actually generating data in one world and then trying to publish it in another world. And there was this, sort of small pipeline through which the data went, and it always happened at the end of the process. Okay, so there were a number of people who began to try to help it happen during the research process itself, and we were one of them. So what we wanted to do was to develop systems that would help people archive their data better so that it could be used retrospectively by other researchers and reused. Okay, of course, what we found is that, well, it's nice to have an idea of being so generous with your data and doing all that extra work up front so somebody else can use it. But in point of fact, you need things along the way to encourage people to put in that extra effort. And essentially what we've found is that visualization is that thing. And now, okay, it's much closer to the end point. But now as we're getting this flood of data, okay, visualization is also really useful for those people who are using other people's data. Okay, so one of the things that projects that we have been working with, we began our work with the forest canopy. So these are folks who travel into the canopy, often by balloon or by by mountain climbing techniques, and try to get a characterization of individual trees and of forests. Okay, and one of the difficulties is that trees are among the longest lived species on Earth, I suppose. And so we don't have many studies that span 1,000 years, but we do have forests that span that long. And so we wanted to study forests, quite old forests in the Pacific Northwest. And so we began to replace time with space. So in this study, we have 8 different sites, and what we tried to do was to choose those sites so that they would be as similar as we could make them, and then study each of them in order to determine how trees mature and how they form both the structure of individual trees and the forest. Okay, and it soon became evident that there's a lot of data. Okay, we have over 1,000 trees in this very intensive database, and 100 of them are very intensely measured, which means that we have measured every branch, every location of the branch, every angle of the branch, and all by hand. And so we began doing visualizations for people. And what happened is that as soon as we started doing visualizations for these people, they told their friends, and those people told their friends, and people started to coming to us and saying, gee, we really would like to visualize our data. Can you do that? And I said, well, you got to put it in this database first. And so people began asking us to do this. Okay, and I guess some of the things that became useful, okay, for example, right over here, is being able to superimpose different data sets. I mean, it sometimes is difficult to actually integrate 2 databases, but if you can visualize them both on the same canvas, you can sometimes see things. And what this was our earliest attempt to visualize airspace, empty space. Okay, so we had 2 different studies, one which looked at the distribution of individual trees and the size of the crowns, and the other which actually measured the airspace, and so we superimposed those. Down here we have a different study that looked at the airspace, and here you see individual trees and locations. These are combinations of each of several different sites where we put the airspace next to the tree space, okay? 2 different studies, and as you can see, thank goodness, they do tend to be kind of mirror images of each other. And so people really enjoyed having these 3D views of their data. And we were all set to say, gee, 3D is the cat's meow, when we discovered that it doesn't quite do everything best, okay? I mean, there are some visualizations where, people just want to see things in 2D, okay? So we began also doing some 2D visualizations for people. All right, so we began trying to abstract what we were doing in terms of visualizations, because as we got more people who came to us, we didn't want to do a separate visualization for each person, each study. And so we began these things called visualization sorts. And so we have a system now which will, if you load in your data and your data has to do with trees and forests, we can tell you what visualizations you can do with it, and then the user selects the visualization that fits the purpose. Okay. Okay, so do I have time to show a little movie? Okay. So, all right. So again, I guess I want to say that people just sort of started coming to us and said, well, gee, can you do this for us? And one of the people that came to us was a modeler who is doing fire studies at Yosemite. And what they wanted to do was something that seemed very straightforward to me, but they couldn't figure out how to do it. These are very smart people. They wanted to overlay their land cover data on top of topographic maps, okay, and on top of digital elevation maps. And so we did this for a number of their studies, both And I think what is sort of interesting about this, these are all climate change, this is all climate change research, where the National Park Service is paying for these ecologists to come in and tell them what they can expect if we get the kind of climate change that we're anticipating. And so this combines, these visualizations can combine data collected in the field in the past and then also modeling data. So suddenly, you know, our work with data became much more complicated because suddenly, okay, instead of just having field data, we had model data and lots of it, okay, and our poor systems couldn't accommodate that. And also, we had to deal with complex topography and begin to figure out a way to work with that. Okay, so we decided that we would start a new visualization project that would accommodate different kinds of data than simply forests and trees. Okay, and essentially what our informants tell us, okay, Denise Locke is a social scientist, is that map-based visualizations and charts work really well with scientists, but that is less true for other stakeholders who don't think in that way. And so what we're working on is trying to figure out ways that we can communicate natural phenomena that uses develops intuition about what's going on at multiple scales. So we're working with some modelers at the H.J. Andrews Long-Term Ecological Research Site in Oregon. And what we're doing is allowing them to turn on and off different variables and then to view them on a canvas, okay, and create these 3D maps and these charts, okay, you know, so the scientists want their charts, okay, and then to be able to have multiple views of these simultaneously and play and watch the animations. So I brought a demo with me that's I guess going to be installed somewhere, and you can watch this animation in the demo. Okay, so so one of the things I want to talk about is a little bit about the challenges that we have in doing this work. And at Evergreen has 1,000 acres of woods that surrounds the institution. And the students use it as an ecological laboratory. And so this one area is called Barking Dog Creek, and in it we're doing some relatively long-term studies of the campus, okay, which is now kind of an urban environment, okay. And so our contribution to this work is to visualize the data that the students are creating, and then, okay, so you can see how many, I guess a lot of people here know about LiDAR. Okay, so this is, I guess, a fairly new technique where it's light detection and ranging, okay, and it produces a point cloud. And one of the things we're trying to do is to superimpose the data that's been collected on the ground with the LiDAR data. So this is airborne LiDAR. The entire area around, on the campus and around the campus has been LiDAR'd from the air. And this is also a big issue at H.J. Andrews, which is, you know, LiDAR gives us a lot of new data, new kinds of data, but aligning that LiDAR with the data that you have in your data stores that you've collected over time is a big problem for people. And so you can see that the trees are poking up out of the LiDAR cloud, okay, and something isn't quite right here, okay. And then, okay, so here you have another view of the LiDAR cloud, okay. Oh, I don't want to end the show. And this gets even more complicated when you try to superimpose field data, airborne LiDAR, and ground-based LiDAR. Okay, so we've now been working with a spatial scientist at the University of Washington, and she's come down and done ground LiDAR of the area that I've shown you. And so now we're trying to put together the data from those three sets of collections, okay? And we've had, discussions with the people at H.J. Andrews, and they're having exactly the same problems that we are, okay? So essentially, what we want to do with our visualizations is to produce more than just maps and charts. We'd like to produce images that allow people to get the same kind of intuitions that they get when they're in the place where they are, okay? So when you're in, the old story about Isaac Newton and the apple that falls from the tree, and he gets the idea about, oh yeah, gravity, yeah, great, okay. Well, it's those kinds of intuitions that we want to foster, because with the very critical issues that we have now with climate change, ecologists are needing to think across scales. So what they want to do is to be able to look at data in one scale and figure out what that says about about phenomena at a higher spatial scale. And so there are no theories, right? I mean, well, there are theories, but they're not all well accepted about how to do that, okay? So the idea is that through the visualization of these natural phenomena, we think that the scientists could gain new hypotheses and begin to test them, okay? So we want them to be able to navigate within the 3D space, to select the attributes to view, to let them view those attributes side by side, to superimpose them, to move backwards and forwards through time, and also through spatial scales, okay? And of course, very important is to help them explain what they're doing to a diverse audience. So with one project that we're working on, we're working from the plot scale, which you see over here at the top left, all the way to the region level. I don't know if you know how well you know your geography of Oregon, but the H.J. Andrews is inside the box, okay? The little gray box there on the bottom left. And it's one small part of that. And so these modelers and field researchers work at different levels, and so what we're trying to do is to create visualizations at each spatial scale and tie them together, okay? And then, of course, we have this issue, so essentially if we're really going to do something with if we're really going to learn how to deal with the human-environment interactions that we're now faced with in terms of human-induced climate change, we're going to have to begin thinking at scales that ecologists and that ecologists typically haven't done work at, okay? Most work in ecology is done at the plot scale. I mean, a lot of people do work at, say, a watershed level. Some people, might do work at the regional level, but it's very, very difficult to work up to the continental or the global scale. Okay, this particular project is just going up to the region, and it's sort of hard enough. Okay, so here's a little bit of kind of history. When I began this work, this is how ecological data management was typically portrayed. Okay, as in terms of volume, Okay, typically data sets were smaller than business data sets, but a lot more complex. Okay, and the difficulty was that there was a lot of software to deal with business data, but there was not much to deal with ecological data. Okay, so, but now, okay, if we think about how the role of ecology has changed and become much broader, with environmental science, the data is all over the map, so to speak. And the problem is much harder, I think, okay? Because not only we're trying to integrate data all the way down to the gene sequence level, but all the way up to satellite images in terms of data volume, and all the way over to the right in terms of complexity with biodiversity and model data and ubiquitous computing. Okay, so some of the problems, just like really haven't gone away. They're still here. We still have problems. So these are kind of traditional data issues. I see them now again as I'm working with with visualization. The problems of data haven't gone away. We still have to integrate data, but we have more complex data types, more formats. And they're even more complex. With more data comes more problems with tracking where the data comes from, provenance, the quality of the data, and so forth. And then there also come computational challenges because the data volume is so much higher than it was before. And then finally, one of my objectives in my original project was to make databases easy enough for scientists to use so they could use them themselves. They didn't have to hire a programmer to design a database and write basic code for them to do their studies. So, and this I think is really important because, first of all, most scientists can't afford to hire a programmer. But secondly, explaining their complex work to a programmer is often not worth the time. Okay, in other words, it's much better to try to give them the tool to do their own programming than to just give them a programmer. Okay, but there are other kinds of problems that I now see. Okay, the new problem with data integration is this alignment in 3D space and time. Okay, we've got different measurements. And we need to put them together and align them so that they actually look like they're actually co-spatial. There's some kind of conceptual model mismatch. What we're trying to do is to visualize processes, but we've got GIS models that don't handle that very well. While before we just wanted to carry data, metadata about provenance and data quality around, now we're faced with the issue of how do we represent that to people so they understand what they're seeing. And then fourthly, we need to combine analytics somehow with the visualization. It's not enough just to have the pretty picture. And then we really need to know more about which visualizations work, for which problem and with each audience. I mean, is 3D always the best? Is animation always the best? Do we need photorealism? Do we need to immerse people? Do we need fly-throughs and so forth? Okay, so before we were faced with doing that, and we really focused, at least I did, certainly on the data, and now my focus is much more trying to work from data to knowledge with a scientist, and then some kind of action by influencing resource managers and the public. Okay. All right, so immersive technologies, just one last slide. Well, somehow being there is still a lot of fun, It will be good, but being there is also good. Okay.